Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Shifting Gears. My name's Greyson Harris. That's Whitney Cowell.
Hi.
We are here to talk about, probably the thing that you see when you look outside your window if you see smoke and hazy conditions. We're talking about the Canadian wildfire. Well, wildfires, I should say, isn't just one wildfire. There's multiple that's basically engulfing the entire state. Well, Canada just couldn't keep it to themselves. There's plenty of smoke coming into the U.S., as far away as Europe as well. They are sharing with the world. That's just how generous Canada is, even during a disaster. So let's get into some background, yeah? So Canada has been dealing with record-setting wildfires for the last few months, and, well, they're about to get a lot worse. So far, 11 Canadian provinces and territories have been affected, and thousands of people have already been evacuated. Like I said, smoke has drifted as far away as Europe, causing extremely poor air quality in major cities like New York, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit. This wildfire has already been declared the worst in Canada's history for total area burned, number of evacuations, and the total cost of fighting the fires, surpassing the 1989 fire season. There's been roughly 3,500 recorded fires so far in 2023, burning over 27 million acres of land, which is roughly the size of Virginia. There are currently over 500 to 600 active wildfires. Half of those are deemed uncontrollable, which is not a word that you want to use when talking about wildfires. So we're not even close to the peak season for Canadian wildfires. Usually the peak season for fires in Canada starts from around May until October. We're just now in July, and it's already the worst wildfire in Canadian history. There isn't one good singular answer to really explain how or why these fires started, but, well, they've led to some pretty interesting conspiracy theories, ranging all the way from arson to flying flamethrowers and lasers from space, because why not?
Pew, pew.
Thank you for the sound effects. One thing is clear, though. This disaster will have a very long-lasting effect on the Canadian landscape, air quality around the world, and as we'll get into, much more than just that. An upcoming weather pattern known as El Nino is expected to cause global temperatures to spike, and it's going to continue to warm the Earth for the next 9 to 12 months. So Get ready for pretty much the hottest year on record. This weather pattern can cause severe droughts and, ironically, can also cause severe flooding, depending on where you are. And they've already been a major problem in Canada since about last year. Regardless of how the fire started, it still needs dry conditions to gain momentum and spread, and this year's El Nino is making it way hotter and way drier than it's ever been. Canada does not have a national firefighting service. Local resources then get stretched thin because of these major wildfires. The first wave of these fires began in May. Government officials declared a state of emergency on May 6. The fires in Quebec and Ontario are getting most of the attention, but there are record-setting fires all over the country, even as far north as the Northern Territories, like adjacent to Alaska. One of the fascinating aspects of this story, though, is that it kind of seemed like all the fires started at the same time, which is not how that's supposed to work. So how could this be? Well, let's get into it. Let's find out. Like I said, there are plenty of conspiracy theories, and we're going to get into them, but the most likely suspect for this, most likely lightning. Historically, roughly half of all wildfires in Canada are started by lightning, accounting for roughly 85% of all the land burned. So even though they only account for half the total number of fires, they're responsible for significantly more damage. Lightning-caused fires tend to occur in clusters and in remote locations, which would help explain why some of the major fires seem to pop up around the same time, and also why they're doing so much damage. Lightning was actually recorded near the affected regions roughly 12 to 48 hours before the fire started. But can lightning from days earlier lead to wildfires? Yes. For example, a lightning strike may set a tree on fire, but it can sometimes take multiple hours or even days for it to spread into something large enough to become a problem.
And that usually depends on the type of tree that it is and the condition of the tree and where the tree is at in its lifespan.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of factors when Canada has one of the densest forest regions in the world that kind of stack up against them when it comes to lightning problems.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and Canada is, I believe, the second largest country in the world by surface area. And as many fires as there are, it really only accounts for like less than 1% of Canada's total land, which puts into perspective how large Canada is, but it should not diminish the fact that the amount of land burned so far is the size of Virginia. So
which
it's not insignificant.
1% of their forest has already just burnt.
Yeah, it is the second biggest. Yes. Thank you for confirming that.
The Peanut Gallery has confirmed.
Yes, we have a confirmation from the Peanut Gallery that Canada is in fact the second biggest country in the world. That's why we bring you here. Thank you. So basically all it takes after a lightning striking a tree is for the wind to shift in a particular direction, catch a couple dry leaves. Here we go. So is lightning a possible culprit? Absolutely. And it's likely that it caused a pretty significant chunk of the fires that are happening now, but not all of them. There are too many fires in too many areas for it to all be lightning. There's still plenty of other factors to consider. And it is, again, I'm going to remind you, it's very important to remember that it's just dry and hot. That is the number one thing about this, because no fire can start without it being this dry and this hot. However, obviously, something has to start it, right? Some of these theories of how it started are reasonable, like lightning. Some not so much. How about arson?
Sure.
Yeah. So this may sound like one of the crazy conspiracy theories that is floating around, and for some people in some scenarios it is. Believe it or not, though, arson actually does have a pretty legit role to play in this disaster. Just how much of a role, well, that's up for debate, but here are some of the facts supporting the argument, and then you can sort of make your own conclusion. So researchers at Colorado University conducted a study of wildfires from 1992 to 2012, and they found that 1.2 million of the 1.5 million fires that were started by humans. It's about 80%.
That's such a sad statistic.
Right, yeah, we think of wildfires as being something that happens in nature, right? But 80% of the time is not.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Thank you, Smokey Bear.
You're welcome.
All right, so this obviously doesn't always mean arson. This can mean something like, throwing a cigarette out of the car, campfires, fireworks. Mm-hmm. But it does show that the grand majority of wildfires have at least some sort of human element to them. So you can't ignore the human element of what's going on right now. And right now, there have been multiple arrests and investigations of arson related to the Canada wildfires. This is where it gets a little interesting. A man in Cold Lake is facing 10 charges of arson, including setting fire to multiple vehicles and homes. And this was actually done over the span of months. He didn't set 10 fires at once. That would be impressive.
Busy night.
But yes, that is contributing. Canadian police in Nova Scotia are investigating at least 3 fires that they believe are arson cases. So there is some validity to the idea that at least some of these fires were started by humans and started on purpose. So yeah, technically we can say that it has a percentage of something to do with it, but there's not nearly enough evidence to suggest that all or even most of them are arson cases.
Right. Yeah, I think it would be hard to get to the root cause if a lot of these were man-made, because it is so, as they have labeled, out of control at this point, to go back and pinpoint each of these individual fires and where they started and how they've grown. The resources just for that investigation alone would be astronomical.
Speaking of man-made, we have a real feat of human engineering here.
Sure.
Flying flamethrowers.
Of course.
There's another one of these theories flying around. Do these flamethrowers actually exist? Yes. They're called helitorches. They're actually used during a common... I said that so casually too. Just helitorches.
Great name.
All right, so they use these things during a common practice called backburning. Backburning is the process in which certain areas around a wildfire are burned to prevent the fire from spreading or heading towards a particular direction. So you starve it of the oxygen supply. You can't burn something that's already burned. They spray ignited gelled gasoline from a 45-gallon barrel into specific locations to basically cut off the wildfire's fuel supply, but these things look gnarly. And I would also understand if you don't know what these are, which I didn't until I looked it up. If you don't know what they are, though, well, you can jump to some pretty wild conclusions. Right? So some conspiracy theorists saw the videos of this thing flying through the air and shooting flames out of it like a dragon, and immediately jumped to the conclusion that the government started these fires on purpose to further some kind of agenda. I'm not going to argue that governments don't push agendas, but I'm not going to argue that this is happening in this case.
That would be one of the crazier ways
to get a point across.
We've seen that happen, if that were true.
But can backburning backfire? The answer is yes, absolutely. Okay, so are these flying flamethrowers actually contributing to the fires? No, but possibly yes. It's complicated. So the helitorches are actually there to stop the wildfires, obviously. Why else would they be there? But unpredictable changes in weather patterns can lead to these prescribed burns going horribly wrong. We know that can happen. So that's the problem with fighting nature. It doesn't really fight fair, so we have a tough fight ahead of us. So if it's not flying flamethrowers, then, well, what kind of conspiracy can we possibly think of next? So could these fires have been started purposely by shadowy government agencies or even private organizations with a political or environmental agenda? Seems far-fetched, but let's think about it. How would they go about it, though? If they actually are doing this, they would need to do it inconspicuously. I would think flying flamethrowers is a little bit too on the nose. So how would they go about setting these fires covertly without anyone noticing or catching them in the act? Well, you could have, undercover agents sneaking around, dressed as campers. They could maybe control some of the news coverage, make it seem like it's better or worse than it actually is. Yeah, that's possible, sure. How about lasers from space?
Yes.
Some have theorized that a directed energy weapon was used to shoot a high-powered laser from a satellite to the ground to spark multiple fires at the same time.
Pew, pew.
So do these weapons actually exist? Technically speaking, yes, they do. But they're still highly experimental, and they're mainly being tested as a missile defense system, kind of similar to what Ronald Reagan wanted to do in the 80s. We finally have something similar to that now, about 30 years later. Could one of these weapons have been used to set the fires? Intentionally? Probably not. If they exist, I don't think they intentionally set these fires. They would have the power to do it, sure, but intentionally, probably not.
But what if, and I'm going to connect the dots in a way that's not as tinfoil hat.
Where are you going with this?
I feel like if they have this technology, which probably
do.
Absolutely, yes. This could be an example of human and technology error colliding into like a very catastrophic accident. The odds of us having this, testing it out, and nobody noticing, absolutely zero consequences are pretty thin in my opinion. I think as crazy as like laser beams from space sounds, if we do have this technology and we are testing it out, there is a chance that something could have gone awry and unintentionally hit Canada. I don't think that that is so far-fetched that it is ruled out as an option.
I like where you're going with this.
Yeah.
And if they were to maybe test it to see how it does on the ground, well, there's not very many more remote locations than northern Canada. And there are fires in the northern territories, which how do they get up there? Lasers from space. Come on.
Just a thought.
It's just a thought. I am here for a real life Death Star. So if there is a conspiracy theory that I think has no chance of being true and also a chance of being extremely true, it would be this one.
Yes,
of all
I
of the
agree.
conspiracy theories, this is the one, because of the point you made about it being a weapons system test gone wrong, which has historically happened. I mean, we've had atomic bomb tests go wrong in the Pacific Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Is it super far-fetched to say that we may have done the same thing again by accident?
Yeah, I think
know.
that that's the conspiracy that could be either like completely Looney Tune or it could be completely plausible. And it just sort of depends on the track that you choose to follow.
And those
for
are the
that
best
conclusion.
theories.
Yeah.
Those are the best theories. The ones that are horribly misjudged and thought of. And also, wow, that could work. All right, so regardless of how they started, though, how bad are we talking about, actually, with these fires?
Pretty darn bad.
Well, they've gotten wildly and historically out of control.
Yes.
So, yes, bad. Here are some numbers to kind of put these fires into some scale. So far, the fires have burned nearly 30 million acres of land. This already blows the previous record of 7.6 million acres in 1989 completely out of the water. To put it into even further perspective, the 5 worst wildfires in U.S. history burned a combined 16 million acres, which is almost half of what the current Canadian fires have burned so far. The amount of carbon that is getting released from these fires is already equivalent to what Canada would put up in a year. It's already 88% of that. 600 million metric tons of carbon have already been released. It's on track to match or surpass all of the transportation emissions in the U.S. Another problem with this is, well, they started a lot sooner than they should have. About a month sooner than expected, actually. And in that time, burned 16 times more land than the average. Started sooner, did more damage.
To put that little piece into perspective, the projection for wildfire season and what will burn, because there are wildfires every year across the world, it was projected to be 6.5 to 8.2 million acres burned. And we're at what?
30.
Those are, scientific predictions that are put together with all kinds of different environmental and human factors.
Very educated guess.
Right.
Who could have predicted this one, though? That's the problem. So to make matters even worse, the peak months for Canadian fire season, typically July and August. So technically the worst of it is yet to come. And that means it's also going to get even harder to control. So how much more damage could they possibly do? If these fires continue through the normal fire season, which is typically May through October, then we're looking at roughly 76.6 million acres of burned land by the end of the year. That's equivalent to the entire state of New Mexico, which is the U.S.'s 5th largest state. This would make it easily the largest wildfire disaster in recorded history, surpassing the previous record by nearly 30 million acres. Which also means that the air quality in Canada, the US, and around the world, it's only going to get worse, and it's been abysmally bad so far. So how do we exactly measure air quality? We use something called the Air Quality Index. It's a fairly straightforward thing. Just measures the air quality and grades it on a scale. 0 to 50 is good. 51 to 100 is moderate. 101 to 150 is unhealthy for sensitive groups. 151 to 200, just unhealthy. 201 to 300, very unhealthy. And then 301 and higher is considered hazardous. New York City, which historically struggles with air quality and emissions, they have the second worst air quality in the world right now. That's because of the smoke drifting down from Canada. Toronto and Montreal, they rank 3rd and 4th. So the Canadian fires have catapulted 3 cities into the top 5 worst air quality in the world, just like that. And it doesn't just stop at those 3 either. I mean, we got poor air quality and hazy conditions in major U.S. cities like Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee. All 3 of those have reached air quality index levels of over 300 multiple times consecutively. Like, it's not stopping, it's keeping going. And it did not stop in the north either. It has made its way down to even far south as us. In Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was very hazy about a week ago.
And right now, 20 states are under air quality alert. Not only has it reached a large majority of the U.S., but it is greatly impacting states as well.
So how is this going to affect the economy? How is it going to affect the supply chain? In a lot more ways than you would imagine. So obviously, wildfires can damage and destroy a lot of stuff, including transportation networks like roads, bridges, stuff like that, which would make it impossible to move goods across those lands. Meaning you'll have to find alternate routes, maybe hire additional carriers. Both of those are going to lead to increased costs, either by hiring someone or just paying for gas. Warehouses that are in the fire's path can get destroyed, which leads to millions of dollars of lost inventory. That lost inventory leads to huge financial burdens for the business, and those huge financial burdens for the business leads to a shortage of product for the customer. So it's a trickle-down effect.
Yeah.
Not to mention, just the cost of insurance is also going to arise for warehouses, carriers. It's anything that's been affected by the fire. It's now going to be considered a fire risk. Therefore, the insurance goes up. Those costs go up. Guess what? Everything else does too.
Yep. And then the materials to rebuild any type of infrastructure damage along the way is going to impact consumers differently. And we're going to see a lot of that based off the size of these fires. And
the supply chain problems are doubly worse in Canada. Not only are they dealing with the fires, they're also dealing with labor strikes at some of their ports. Just recently, they've had some of the ships redirected to ports in Washington. So not only is their country on fire, but they can't get anything into the country right now anyway. Just not really a great time for Canada right now, or for the rest of the world if this keeps going, because it's not going to be limited to Canada's borders. Obviously, the air quality has already been bad just in the US, drifted across the Atlantic all the way to Europe. This is going to be a global issue, or kind of already is a global issue, but it's going to become even more of a global issue by the time it's done. Like we said, the timeline would suggest that we're only halfway through this, and we're just now at the peak of it, which means we're about to see it get way worse before we see it get any better. Things aren't looking too hot up there. No. Well, they're looking very hot up there, but they're not looking very good.
Yikes. So right now we're seeing 155.8 thousand evacuations have taken place.
That's
and there's
insane.
Still about 4,500 more that are, advised at this point to evacuate. Canada has 3,790 firefighters that are actively working to put this fire out. Was not enough. So we are seeing volunteers, over 3,000 volunteers from Spain, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Costa Rica, Mexico, the EU, joining together, traveling literally across the world to assist in at least mitigating some of this damage. It is going to continue, but we can mitigate risks as best we can. One of the biggest issues with Canada specifically, Canada is hotter than any other place right now. Like it is warming up faster than any other place in the world at the moment because of these fires. And some of that has to do with the fact that they have boreal forest, which is in Canada the largest and most intact biome in the world. Their trees in the forest consist of spruce, pine, and fir. As you talked about, it is the second largest forest area in the world. Right now, because it is on fire, we're seeing 10 to 20 times more planet heating carbon pollution, 10 to 20 times more, contributing to the overall global temperature. So while we may think it only radiates to a certain capacity, it doesn't. It is going to impact the globe. What we'll see is even further discussions probably about global warming, I would say, in years to come as aftermath of this fire.
To kind of put some perspective to both those things that you said, I'll go back first to how many firefighters are in Canada. You said there are roughly 3,700 Canadian firefighters. So let's think of it this way. There's been nearly 3,500 recorded fires so far in 2023. By, 2-3 weeks from now, we would probably have, each firefighter would have one individual fire. And these individual fires are not small, they are huge. So we're talking about one fire per one Canadian firefighter, and that one fire is acres big. So there's that. And what is burning in those acres? Carbon, like you said. So this now becomes a cycle where carbon goes up, heats the earth hot means dry ground.
Conditions.
Yeah, it's hotter, drier, makes it harder to fight anything.
It's an incredibly unfortunate cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an El Nino going on right now, which means it's hotter and drier than it's ever been. And climate experts are predicting that next year is going to be the hottest year on record. Just last week, the global average temperature reached like 62 or 63. It's not supposed to be that high. I know 62, 63 sounds pleasant. It's not supposed to be that high when you consider things like Antarctica. This is going to be a huge global issue. I mean, I know we keep saying it, but it's hard not to hammer that point down, especially when you bring up that point about the carbon getting released. And obviously, as you mentioned, carbon doesn't get released locally. It goes into the air and disperses all over the place.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to make its way into the atmosphere.
And not only is it going to get...
And spread.
Right. And not only is it going to get hotter because of that, too, but you also have the smoke from the fire blocking out parts of the sun. So ironically, it's going to get really hot and also really cold somehow, just depending on where you are. Guys, weather is usually very hard to predict and explain anyway, and I am going to throw my hands up and give up trying to explain weather for the next couple of years because it seems like it's just going to be a disaster every week.
Right now, top priorities in any wildfire situation, in most natural disasters actually, is going to be the preservation and recovery of people, infrastructure, and watersheds. Obviously, you protect your people. That's why evacuations are taking place. That is not a surprising thing that's happening. The infrastructure is a huge financial burden to rebuild. It causes a lot of issues when certain parts of infrastructure become damaged because while a lot of these are taking place in remote areas out in the forest, they are spreading to very populated places. And then finally is the watersheds. Water is not a resource that we consider limited a lot of times when we look at the grand scheme of the earth and how much is water.
Clean water is, though.
Clean water that is accessible, A, for the people, but B, specifically in a wildfire, natural disaster situation, is a very critical resource to monitor. And with global imports and exports becoming very strained for Canada at the moment, you know, it might seem like there's not too much we can do, but there are some things that we can do.
Small things, sure, but they all add up. You know, whatever you can possibly do for your own health. If you live in one of the cities where the air quality is hazardous, stay indoors.
Yeah.
Seriously. You know, even down in Chattanooga here, where it was hazy outside, sure, but not nearly as bad as it is in some of the northern cities. And even I had to, after a weekend of that, had to change my air filter because it had gotten dirty that fast. Be aware of your own health. Try to keep informed on what's going on. But around that same vein, though, if you're keeping informed, try to have a lot of sources, vet things. As much as I still like our laser theory, but
I do too.
But you know, we're being responsible with it. You know, don't just try your best not to spread blatantly wrong information if you can.
Right.
Just be respectful about the whole situation.
Instead, use your energy to prepare yourself and help educate others on the basics of fire safety, what you can do to contribute to your local economy. There are ways to contribute. Like I said, it might seem helpless, but there are ways to contribute to the global economy and to Canada's economy. Be mindful of, like Greyson said, your own health issues. Be prepared if you have respiratory issues. Be ready that this will impact. If 20 states are already facing alerts, that means it will spread. So being prepared ourselves for what is to come is really important. And I will say, you know, if there are firefighters listening, you know, Canada needs you. I don't know the process to that. I'm sure it's probably not that hard to actually figure out.
Yeah, right now they'll take anyone, I would think.
Honestly, I'm really proud to see, though, that the world is coming together more or less to assist in this. I mean, Canada at the moment has ranked this as a level 5, which means their national resources are being poured into this, which obviously that makes a lot of sense. But it is refreshing to see other countries are jumping on board because, like we said, this will have a global impact. It's not just, you know, Canada and the impacts on the US. If they're seeing it in Europe, it will spread even further. It will have a much bigger reach than I think we're probably able to understand at this moment.
Yeah. So that's basically what's going on there. Like I said, stay safe, do what you can. To all of our, if we have any viewers in Canada, stay safe, please.
Yeah.
Evacuate if they're telling you to, because they're,
Don't be brave.
Don't test nature. I mean, y'all are going through a lot right now, seriously, and I feel for y'all. And from the bottom of my heart, I say, I am sorry.